Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel.
I had to put on my reaching hat. Hear me out.
Obsessed with secrecy, they blurred their faces in this video they made. It shows the start of an initiation ceremony. The order attracted many successful upper-middle-class people, disillusioned with conventional churches, yet hungry for spiritual experiences. At its height, it boasted over 1,000 members in Canada, France, and Switzerland. The order was mystical and elitist. They claimed to be the heirs of the medieval Knights Templar, a curious mix of the Christian and the occult. The order's beliefs were jealously guarded. Only the inner circle were allowed to know the central doctrines, that there were 33 spiritual entities or masters who were said to inhabit temples buried beneath Zurich and the Himalayas. The secrecy proved seductive. The history of cults is littered with mass suicides, but there has never been such a series of deaths, 4 separate incidents over a period of 15 months. On October the 5th, 1994, 5 people were found dead in this house in Canada. 10 hours later in Switzerland, 25 bodies were discovered in a chalet in the small town of Salvan, and 23 more in a nearby village. In less than 24 hours, 53 people had died. Their remains set alight by identical incendiary devices. Among the dead, 8 children, several senior civil servants, and 2 millionaires. But they had something else in common. All were members of a secretive sect, the Order of the Solar Temple.
Thank you for clicking. That was weird, wasn't it? Yeah, and it's only gonna get weirder. Today I want to talk about the Order of the Solar Temple. Now, as the title states, this is like Jonestown, but weirder. In this case, instead of drinking the Kool-Aid, they chose strange methods and formations. Yeah, I'll explain. But before I begin, you guys know I have to give my thanks to my returning subscribers, old and new. Thank you guys so much for your support, especially my last community post. I'm still waiting on the results, but I really do appreciate your support. You guys really are so kind, and I really do appreciate that, so thank you. And if you are new here, hi. This is me. I wear a tinfoil hat and I talk about true crime and conspiracies. It's called Fashion Brenda. Look it up. The Order of the Solar Temple is a secret society that claims to have descended from the Knights Templar, an ancient military order. They came to be around the time of the Crusades, and they got an official endorsement from the Catholic Church at the time. They ended up making a lot of money. They actually would lend money to monarchs. They owned an island. They became a huge military financial institution in a sense, but then later on they were driven underground, and some people believe that they still exist today. Some people say that they disbanded. Then they're connected to the Freemasons, which is connected to the Illuminati, boy. So anyway, let's get into this particular cult, okay? The 2 cult leaders here are masters of manipulation and weirdness. And those 2 are Joseph de Monbro and Luc Juray. It's a lot of French. This is a very French case, if you will, and there's a lot of names and words and things, and I'm gonna try to pronounce them, but I'm gonna fail, and we're gonna all deal with that. Let's talk about Mr. de Monbro first. He's the guy in the cape in my thumbnail. Very fabulous. So Joseph de Monbro was born in rural France in 1924. He was actually born to an Italian. His father was Italian, and that's why, you know, the last name is de Monbro. His father was Catholic, and he was raised in a strict Catholic home. He went to Mass every Sunday up until he was 20. Then, at the age of 31, he joined an occult group. He became really interested in the occult and in more sort of like New Age spirituality, as well as the like secret lodge Mason type of groups? I'll explain. At the age of 31, he joined a group called the Ancient and Mystical Order of the Rose Crucis. Yeah, I said that wrong. And by the 1960s, Joseph de Monbro becomes head of that order, head of the lodge. So he rises up in the ranks really quickly. He becomes known as this spiritual figure and teacher. He would mix this hybrid of Christian principles and values mixed with these occult rituals and beliefs. In 1978, he starts the Golden Way Foundation. Now, he believed he was a reincarnate of Moses and of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaton. Sorry. In 1982, he gives birth to, well, he doesn't give birth, he fathers a child. This child is the child in the thumbnail when he's with the golden cape with the child. Yeah, that's his daughter. And he named her Emmanuel, and he claimed that she was the cosmic child. He declared that Emmanuel was, quote, a cosmic being who would lead in the coming new age. He would pick mates for each other, so he would arrange these marriages, and his whole goal was to arrange couples that would give birth to the mate for his cosmic child to help usher in the new age. It is around this time that Joe de Monbro meets Luc Juray. I like saying it like that, Juray.
The other leader, Luc Juray, had a very different background. A homeopathic doctor, he was well known on the New Age circuit in Canada. He preached a conventional ecological message, advocated a macrobiotic diet, and gave seminars on motivation.
And he would give these lectures. So de Monbro invited Luc to lecture at his Golden Way Foundation. They hit it off. They had a lot of the same beliefs and ideas, and together they decided to create the Order of the Solar Temple. So the membership of the Golden Way Foundation, de Monbro's foundation, those people served as the core beginning base membership of the Order of the Solar Temple. So they already had a strong allegiance to de Monbro. The order was formed in Geneva in Switzerland, but then later on it moved to Zurich, like that's where the headquarters were. And then they had established 33 masters that reigned over everyone in the group. The order then began to expand, and they would have different lodges, which is very similar language to like Freemasons, right? The Knights Templar, it's that secret society Freemason lodge kind of thing. And it spread around Europe. It was in Switzerland, it was in France. They had a very small group in the United States, and they had a big group in Canada, specifically like French speaking Canada. It was very European, French, and also very, very elitist.
Both leaders, de Monbro and Juray, were skilled manipulators who understood their followers' craving for spiritual secrets. Recruits were often told they were reincarnations of famous religious and historical figures.
It flatters your ego to be part of a group that designs itself as an elite, that are the chosen ones. How can you not feel good about it? I actually believed that I was superior to most other people on this planet.
So they kind of played up the elitist thing. They had a whole method, right? So de Monbro, he was responsible for the rituals. He really was the leader behind the scenes. He was the one that interacted with the members, versus Luc Juray, he was the traveler, the speaker, and essentially the recruiter. And they had a really interesting method of recruiting people to make them feel like they were part of the secret, exclusive elite thing, right? So the first thing they did was they created this club, the Atlanta Club. And so Luc Juray would be giving his lectures. He would invite people to join this club. During the meetings in this club, the Atlanta Club, they would discuss de Monbro's ideas. The people who seemed the most receptive to this idea were then invited into a more exclusive club. That was called the Arcadia Club. And then the most dedicated, devoted people of the Arcadia Club were then invited to join the Order of the Solar Temple. They were told that this was a total secret, that, you know, you had to be a special ascended person to be even chosen to be part of this club. And again, as we see in a lot of these cults, they're made to believe like that they're special, this is a special group, and it's like a privilege to be a part of the group. So by the time somebody has become a member of the Order of the Solar Temple, they've already shown how devoted they are. They've been through all these different initiations, if you will, and they're like super devoted already. It was almost like they were groomed. And this was a masterful strategy that paid off because first of all, they targeted wealthy people. And so then once they would get to this point, there was a ritual, a rite to become officially part of this group.
In trying to unravel why 69 men, women and children died, experts have studied the philosophy of the Order of the Solar Temple. Members built chapels like this one to hold their most private rituals. The cult was obsessed with secrecy, codes and symbols. Novices had to pass a series of initiations before they could attend ceremonies. The first step was to be robed in a cape. One initiate was a Canadian insurance salesman, Herman Delorme.
And you would go through this ritual where you would be given a cross, you would be sworn in as a member, and you would also swear not to reveal any of the going-ons inside this group, because everything was kept extremely secretive. There was always what we'd call a guard at the door to make sure that when the time of the ritual actually it was time to start, nobody would interfere, nobody would come in.
The Order's leaders, Joe de Monbro and Luc Juray, carefully designed such ceremonies to engender a sense of mystery and of being in touch with the eternal.
It is said that Luc was so masterful at manipulation that it was described as chilling.
I would have become involved with just about anything to stay with Dr. Juray, and I felt that if I was able to get closer to him, or at least to stay within the group, that at some point I would probably gain more knowledge. I would probably have access to revelations, to wonderful things, and even maybe at one point to be in contact with either entities or extraterrestrials or whatever. That's the impression that I got.
And you wanted that?
Oh yes, I wanted that.
You see, Luc Juray claimed to be Jesus Christ himself. So let's talk about their beliefs a little bit, because let's talk about it. Luc claimed that he had to have sex with one of the female members before each ritual to give him energy and strength to be able to perform in these ceremonies. But their core defining belief was that their world was going to end soon, which seems to be a very common thing with cults. It's very interesting. One of the main things that they have is that, you're special and the world is ending and give me your money. So they believed that the world was going to end soon. They thought it was going to be in the 90s. Their task was to prepare for the second coming of Christ. And they believed that Christ would return in the form of a solar god king. Everything, they're like obsessed with the sun and with fire, and you'll see. So in preparation for the second coming, they believed that they had to elevate to a higher consciousness or a higher spiritual plane, however you want to call it. And this transit or transition would come to take on a very dark, sinister meaning towards the end. But at this time, the concept was the transition was spiritual and in consciousness. At this point in the game, all the followers had believed that Emmanuel de Monbro's daughter was the cosmic child and that she was going to guide them on this transition. And they believed that once the world ended, they were going to be led by the cosmic child through the cosmos to a planet orbiting the star Sirius, and that they were going to inhabit this planet. Fun times. So of course, transiting through the cosmos to the planet orbiting Sirius was quite the privilege. And in order to gain this privilege, well, you had to pay some money. Now keep in mind, right, this order is for the elite. You've got millionaires, you've got civil servants, doctors, even allegedly, my conspiracy don't sue me, we'll talk about it later, but there were police officers that were part of this group. So of course these fees were really expensive, and of course de Monbro and Luc Juray were benefiting from all this money. One of the major ways that they were able to convince people of their powers is by miracles that supposedly were performed in front of them and that these members witnessed.
Only the elite, who had passed all the initiations from novice to knight, were treated to the secrets of the inner sanctum. Here they were privy to startling revelations. Not only messages from their mysterious spiritual masters, but sometimes apparitions of the figures themselves. Legends seemed to come to life. Objects of tremendous spiritual significance mysteriously materialized. Proof, claimed de Monbro, of how blessed they all were.
He would say to us, "Do you realize that we are the only people on the planet to be seeing these things? That throughout history there have been great souls, great saints, and they have never had a sign. And we have flashes, signs. We have the blood of Christ. We have masters who materialize in front of our very eyes, and Excalibur, and we have the menorah, the seven-branched candelabra which belonged in the Ark of the Covenant. One day, the Holy Grail, the very Holy Grail the Knights of the Round Table had sought after, appeared in the Ark of the Covenant. It had a shining quality.
Didn't you have any doubts?
No, we fell to our knees with more than joy to see the Holy Grail.
Things started to go downhill and fast when it was discovered that these miracles were actually nothing but illusions and trickery and hologram and special effects.
There were serious problems by early 1993. The order was suffering from internal squabbles. De Monbro was quizzed on what he had done with the large sums of money donated by members. But far more significant, the order's doctrines were being questioned. Thierry and some others discovered the apparitions of spiritual masters were just clever illusions created by lighting tricks and holograms.
I had worked 14 years in the group, believing in everything I was told. Now I discovered it was all false. But then Joe made me live through extraordinary experiences. Now I was told I was the vehicle for another reincarnation, that I was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux.
What made matters worse was that the person who exposed this was de Monbro's own son. His name is Eli. I'm going to call him Eli. I'm sure that's a different pronunciation in French. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to call him Eli. So Eli found out that the miracles were fake, and he told other people in the group. Of course, people were upset and they left the group. Upon realizing this hypocrisy, a member by the name of Tony Dutoit, remember him? Remember Tony? Tony Dutoit spoke out and left the group. 15 other members also left. So there were other members that were actually so loyal that they refused to believe that these miracles were fake, even when the sun was telling them that they were. So they stuck around and they stayed loyal to de Monbro and Luke. Members started noticing a change in de Monbro because de Monbro used to be very humble, and in the way he dressed and in the way he lived, and furthermore he used to be very like he would be at the same level as the members. But as the membership grew and the money was coming in, de Monbro changed. De Monbro started living a much more lavish, opulent lifestyle. He had fancy clothes, he was traveling first class, he had several luxury homes, and he stopped performing those daily chores with the members. It was like he was too good to do that. And then furthermore, he became very authoritarian. He would not take well to criticism at all, and actually they started calling him the dictator behind his back.
De Monbro was dealing constantly with human problems, which is not surprising when you're running an organization like a dictator or like a Führer, when you're splitting couples up and creating others.
Thierry was one of many followers who lived in small communities established and run by the order. De Monbro controlled every aspect of their lives.
everything about our lives, the food we ate, our experiences in the crypts. The smallest things were controlled. So we lived with a sword constantly above our heads. But he was very clever. He said, "You don't have to listen to me. I'm just a signpost. I'm just telling you the way. You can go which way you want, but then don't come to me afterwards and complain." As he was constantly showing us what a master he was in the crypts, in everything, we were completely taken over by his personality. It was like a child who loves his father. His father's everything. He'll believe what his father says is right. He was our father, and there were 50 children.
People would come up to me and tell me, "Do you know that the Monbro is probably the most powerful reincarnated entity on the face of this planet?" Where it came to a point where you must not sit in his chair, you must not use Juray's chair. The energies were too strong because these people were so powerful. You'd look at Juray and you could probably believe that if you wanted to, but you look at the Monbro and you're saying, him. But then on a couple of occasions you just see him in action and see that he had control on things.
From a young age, de Monbro liked to be in control.
He was a man who in his childhood had a history of violence. Growing up, he hadn't really known his father at all. He also said to us that he had developed a special, slightly odd relationship with his mother. He used to sit up with her far into the night, and they used to knit together. He had picked up what he called the rhythm of his mother, and he very soon discovered that he was gifted, above all, as a hypnotist.
De Monbro became increasingly paranoid. After his son spoke out and members left, he was always like people are out to get him. The interesting thing was that the members believed that what he was paranoid about is what he was actually doing, because he was trying to split the members, like divide and conquer. He would make them all not trust each other, not talk to each other, come to him so that he could control all of them. So then in 1991, it all came to a head, because not only did an ex-member speak out about them and call them a cult, but he actually filed a lawsuit against them. A few years after this lawsuit, Luke gets in trouble with the law. Basically, long story short, he was trying to buy a gun with a silencer. It was illegal in Canada to have a gun with a silencer. So he purchased it from an undercover and he got arrested. He got out after a little bit. He had a fine. It wasn't that bad. But the big problem with that was his reputation, because it was headline news all over Quebec. It was like the big story that was going on there. And his reputation was tarnished, and they had affiliated him with the group and the arrest. And it was not a good look for the Order of the Solar Temple. This incident had put them on the police radar. So police started surveillancing them. Now, this did not help de Monbro's paranoia. The thing about it is that he would tell the members that what they were doing was so important, and it was such this huge mission that all these major governments of the world and police and all these people were trying to stop them from this huge mission. And then de Monbro's health began to fail. I'm sure the stress didn't help. He had problems with his kidneys. He had become incontinent. And lastly, he had developed cancer. And de Monbro's cosmic child, Emmanuelle, remember her? Well, she began rebelling. She had basically become unmanageable and was not into daddy's little cult. So all these events compounded, and they led to a decrease in membership, which also led to a decrease in money. Now it's spring 1994, and de Monbro is basically telling everybody that the end of the world is near, very near, and it's going to happen due to an environmental disaster, and that, you know what, they need to leave the earth prematurely. Remember de Monbro's paranoia? It increased significantly. Quote, "We don't know when they might close the trap on us. A few days? A few weeks? We are being followed and spied upon in our every move. All the cars are equipped with tracing and listening devices. All of their most sophisticated techniques are being used on us. While in the house, beware of surveillance cameras, lasers, and infrared. Our file is the hottest on the planet, the most important of the last 10 years, if not of the century. However, that they may be, as it turns out, the concentration of hate against us will give us enough energy to leave. So this is where de Monbro's head was at, spring 1994, just a few months before everybody. The rules, the rituals, everything had become a lot more fanatical, a lot more extreme. And the definition of transit had changed. Basically dying. That's what transit became. De Monbro's teachings changed, and he started telling them, you guys need to prepare for this transit. This transit can happen at any moment. In fact, he put them all on 24-hour alert. They were on call for the transit. An audio cassette was found, and it had a recording of a conversation between de Monbro and Luke. So for context of this conversation, this happened a few months before the transit when another group stole their thunder. Who? Well, have you heard of the Branch Davidians? Waco? Yeah, that whole thing had happened, and it was all over the news, and they felt like somebody had stolen their thunder. Let me read you parts of their conversation. Joe de Monbro: people have beaten us to the punch, you know. Luke Juray: well, yeah, Waco beat us to the punch. Joe de Monbro: in my opinion, we should have gone 6 months before them. What we'll do will be even more spectacular. And that's when the transit started.
In September 94, a week before the first deaths, 125 members were summoned to a meeting at Avignon in France. De Monbro told them the order would change its structure, and from now on, everyone would report directly to him.
So remember Tony Dutoit, the guy I told you to remember, who left the group and spoke out against them? Okay, so Tony Dutoit and his wife, not only did they leave the group, but they then started claiming that they were having their own visions and their own miracles, and they had a child, and they named that child Emmanuel. And as we know, de Monbro already has a daughter named Emmanuel that he claims was the cosmic child. And when he found out that they were doing this, he went into a rage. And so he declared that their child, Emmanuel, was the Antichrist. He said that the Antichrist was born in order to prevent him from completing his spiritual mission, and so he ordered the killing of the Antichrist, which was this little baby boy. So Tony Dutoit, his wife, and his child were all stabbed to death repeatedly, and the baby was found with a wooden stake in his heart, and he was wrapped in a plastic bag. According to the autopsy, they say that it looked like they were stabbed by different people. This whole incident happened on September 30th, 1994. And a few days later, on October 4th, is when the chalet, the home, was found ablaze. So this is all happening in Canada. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, at around the same time, it all starts when Joseph de Monbro holds a ritual Last Supper. Of course, Joe de Monbro played the part of Jesus Christ, naturally. After this Last Supper, Luke and de Monbro tell the members, the apocalypse is here, the end is near, environmental collapse is upon us, and that we need to get a head start on the transit. So right around midnight on October 4th, 1994, the Swiss chalet that de Monbro and everyone was staying at is on fire. In Canada and in Switzerland, there are 2 chalets that are on fire at the same time with dead bodies inside. And all of these people are part of the same cult. Before firefighters arrived at the scene in Switzerland, the neighbors saw that there was a fire going on, and they ran over there first. As they looked in further, they saw that there were these huge, large plastic bags filled with gasoline that were tied to each other with a timer. It was like a gas bomb that was set to go off, which is probably how the homes were set on fire. But it seems like this one hadn't been ignited. At around that time is when the police showed up. When they arrived, they discovered that actually a lot more destruction was planned. From the way they had it set up, everything was supposed to be set on fire, and there was supposed to be no remains or anything left, and it was supposed to be a total mystery what happened. But it turns out that a lot of these things either didn't go off, or if they did go off, they didn't create as much damage as was expected, and a lot of things were still intact. One of the things that was intact was their chapel. This was a secret chapel. It had all this red satin silk curtains, a lot of mirrors, and there seems to be like an altar in the middle with a chalice, and they found dead bodies in a circle formation around this chalice with the heads pointed outwards and the feet inside towards the circle. That was 18 bodies that were in this formation. They also saw blood on the floor. There were trap doors leading into other rooms. They could tell that this whole room was supposed to be secret and never discovered by anyone who wasn't part of the group. All of the people in this formation had on the same ceremonial robes, and they had plastic bags on their heads, and a lot of them were drugged, and all of them had a bullet wound. They had all been shot in the head. Some of them had their hands handcuffed behind their backs. So was this a mass suicide? Was this a mass murder? Or was it both? In addition, there was a sword. There were boxes of ammunition. There were several weapons, but none of which these firearms, none of them were the actual weapon that was used to shoot these people. Remember Eli de Monbro's son, who told them about the fake miracles? He was among the bodies too, and police couldn't determine if, you know, he was being held against his will and wasn't allowed to defect and was killed, or if he never really fully left, or maybe he left and came back. They couldn't tell, but he was there and he was dead. A few hours later, 100 miles away in another town in Switzerland called Salvan, fires broke out in cottages over there. So now you've got in Canada, and then in one place in Switzerland, and now another place in Switzerland. They're all on fire. Investigators found 25 bodies. Later on, they determined that at least 4 of the bodies were children, and one of them was as young as 5. The interesting thing here is that none of the bodies here had bullet wounds. And according to one of the firemen, quote, "Several corpses wore smiling expressions as if they had felt exalted as they died." And there were no ceremonial robes. Nobody was wearing ceremonial robes. However, one similarity was that they also had a red chapel with the red draping and the altar with the chalice. Quick recap of the first transit. 53 members died, 3 in Quebec and 48 in Switzerland. There were 3 different methods used to carry this out. In Quebec, they were stabbed and burned. In Switzerland, where the star formation was, they were given sedatives and shot. In the third cottage that's in Switzerland, they were poisoned. 14 months after the first transit, the second transit happened. So it's a little bit over a year, but this one takes place in France.
On December the 22nd, 1995, another 16 members of the order were found dead. They were killed in the Vercors, an isolated region of France. All the bodies had been burned and laid out in star formation. 2 of the dead were French policemen whose car had been seen near the scene of the earlier massacres. They'd even been interrogated at the time. Lardanchet was one of the 2 French police officers seen near the chalets just after the first deaths. Both were found dead in the Vercors. No one knows whether they were true mystics or working undercover. After the first killings, both were interrogated and released. They were allowed to keep their service revolvers. It now turns out that these guns were used to kill some of the 16 in the Vercors itself.
What ended up happening here was their bodies were all found in a clearing, and all the bodies were shot and set on fire. And it appeared what had happened was 2 out of the 16 were the ones who did all the killing. And out of the 16, 3 were children. And the way that it happened is that the 14 that were shot initially had ingested some sort of sedative, and they were shot, and then they were sprayed with an accelerant and set on fire. And then the remaining 2 who had shot the 14, they sprayed the accelerant on themselves, ignited it, and then shot themselves. Later on, it was revealed that these people were the remaining members of the Order of the Solar Temple who still remained part of the Order after the first transit, and some of them had regretted not being part of the first transit. Some were kind of upset. There was like this internal struggle where they thought that the method and the way it was carried out was horrible, but then later on they were convinced that in fact the way it was done was correct and what Monbro and Luke did was okay, and so now they wanted to go ahead and join them as well on that planet orbiting the star Sirius, of course. And now we get to the third and final transit. This one happened 2 years after the second transit. So this one happened in March of 1997, and it happened on March 22nd, which I think is another significant date, maybe. Is it the spring? Is that the spring solstice? I could be wrong. Or summer? No, I don't know. Spring? I don't know. Spring equinox? Is it the spring equinox on March 23rd? I could be wrong. Anyway, the third transit happened in Quebec and 5 bodies were discovered. And this one is interesting because there were survivors. The survivors were teenagers, 3 teenagers. Their ages were 13, 14, and 16. And they were found in another building nearby hiding and drugged up. Those teenagers were children of one of the dead couples. All right, and now is where the conspiracy theories began. The rumors all started when there was a misunderstanding about whether Luke was among the dead. I found this article from the LA Times that was published October 7th, 1994, which would have been like 2 or 3 days after the events, right? Meanwhile, the international search continued for Luc Juray, the 46-year-old homeopathic doctor who authorities and cult experts say led the sect and who may or may not have died with his followers. No one yet knows if Luke is among the victims of the murder-suicide. Police say they would continue searching for him at least until all the bodies had been identified. So then shortly after this, the bodies were identified, the police came out and they said that Luke was in fact dead, but people did not believe the official story. People said no, the police misidentified his body. So the public outcry became so loud and overwhelming that the police had to actually go back and identify his body again just to satisfy the public.
We had made an identification first on the basis of dental records, and we were sure. And so we stopped our investigations. But then, for reasons I would call political, precisely in order to be able to answer questions, we decided to do a second identification on the basis of DNA testing. We suggested that to the judge and he agreed, and that test led to precisely the result we expected, an identification of 99.99% certainty.
Then adding to the conspiracies were the controversies and inconsistencies in the investigation. Listen to this.
If we are to believe the official account, a group of middle-aged civil servants and businessmen and women organized 3 separate collective suicides on 2 continents within 24 hours of each other. And barely a year later, another 16 members, including 2 French policemen, also killed themselves in bizarre circumstances. All the authorities are desperately keen for us to believe this version. But our own investigations reveal a very different picture. There's little evidence to suggest the order was planning to annihilate itself. Quite the opposite. In Canada by the late 1980s, the order was expanding, buying several properties near Montreal. It acquired this farm at Sainte-Anne-de-la-Parade, where it developed a new age community, heavily into organic farming. They even planned a nuclear shelter, hardly the act of an organization about to wipe itself out. The author of a number of books on cults, including one on the order itself, Facon pointed out a series of inconsistencies. The specially adapted gun used in the killings was found outside the chalet in Salvan with no fingerprints. Its owner, Joel Egger, had flown to Geneva from Montreal just before the bodies were found in Canada. a police contact told Facon the gun could only fire 1 bullet at a time. The Swiss police claimed all 65 bullets came from the gun. When the press questioned the thoroughness of the Swiss investigation, the authorities rejected all criticism.
I want to know, should you be asking me questions or should I be asking you questions?
Making matters worse and adding to this idea that the investigation was not thorough was the fact that the crime scenes were not secured. In fact, they were so vulnerable that the documentary film crew were able to enter the home and actually take some items there and listen to what they found.
Had anyone checked the memory of this electronic typewriter? Or sifted through the many files, tapes and documents still lying around? We had one of the video cassettes examined and found it a surprising contrast to the cult's professed beliefs. It contained a pornographic Canadian movie.
So now I want to ask you guys, what do you think happened? Do you guys think this is a mass murder, or do you think it was a mass suicide? Do you think it was a little bit of both? If you do think it was a little bit of both, if I can talk, what do you think happened? Like, who did what, why, blah, blah, all that. Me personally, what I think is I think that they were growing increasingly desperate, pessimistic. They were not making enough money. They were losing members, and they felt like this was their final hurrah. And I also think that they believed that if I'm going down, I'm taking everyone with me. And so that's why they forced people to go who maybe didn't want to transit. You know what I mean? That is all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is different. I don't know if people will like this, but I had to do it for me. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.